used to worry way too much about resume fonts. After palling around with recruiters over the last few years, I've come to learn that resume fonts aren't as big of a deal as we may have previously made them seem. I've literally never heard a recruiter say,
"Yeah, I totally stopped reading their resume because they use Times New Roman."
But fonts do matter, but not for the reasons that we may think. In this video, I'm spilling the tea on resume fonts, and I'm going to tell you why fonts matter, what types of fonts that I recommend, and what font sizes I strongly suggest. I'm Kamara Toffolo, resume writer, LinkedIn consultant, job search strategist, and LinkedIn top voice, who helps established professionals dare to do work differently and land great fitting gigs. I post new job search videos every Tuesday and go live every Thursday. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell to get notifications. My videos will equip you with some of the most valuable information to make your job search easier, because job searching shouldn't be this hard. So why do fonts on resumes actually matter? When we're thinking about fonts, there are two really important things for us to consider. First and foremost is readability by a human. Second is aesthetic or look, feel, or style or brand, whatever you want to call it. First, let's talk about readability. We know that most resumes are being read on a digital device. Computer, tablet, phone. So what that means for font is we want a font that will support readability on those devices. And throughout this video, when I am referring to fonts, I'm only referring to fonts that are built into Microsoft Word, because Microsoft Word is the industry standard in which you should be building your resume. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's tackle the question about font size. Different fonts can look differently at the same font size. So I encourage you to test out fonts, see what works best for you and what you like. But as a general rule, fonts should be no smaller than 10 points for the content of your resume. For the headers and subheaders on your resume, I'd recommend a 12-point or maybe a 14-point font. And if you want to achieve the really nice aesthetic that I have going on the resumes that I've shown on this channel, you'll want to use a larger point font, like an 18-point font for your name. So why is it important for us to use at least a 10-point font for our resume content? After all, if people are reading resumes on devices, they can just zoom in, right? But as a job seeker, we really want to avoid creating extra work or extra steps for the reader to get the information that they need about us. So now let's talk about resume font styles. So as we've already covered, resumes are largely being read on digital devices, and sans serif fonts are known for their readability on digital screens and digital devices. Whereas serif fonts would be more readable if your resume was actually being printed on paper. If people were still in the business of printing resumes off, then Times New Roman would certainly be appropriate in that case. Aside from readability, the font we use can give an instant impression. Just think about how people feel about Comic Sans or Comic Sans, shown here. Yes, it's technically a sans serif font, but it does give an instant feel of being juvenile. When we switch that font up for its cousin Calibri, shown here, the aesthetic of the document is instantly elevated. Now, what if you want to get a little snazzy and use fonts that aren't necessarily built into Microsoft Word, but are more aftermarket fonts that you download from the internet? You could do that and use an aftermarket font. And I used to as well, but I no longer do. The reason I no longer use aftermarket fonts are because it would require the reader, when they're viewing your resume in Microsoft Word, to also have that aftermarket font downloaded. And if they don't have that font downloaded, then your resume isn't going to show up the same way that it was intended. So my recommendation is to play it safe and use the fonts that are already built into Microsoft Word. So while we're talking about fonts, I would be remiss if I didn't address the impact of having a variety of fonts on your resume. The danger of having many different fonts on your resume is it can compromise the readability of your resume. Using too many fonts can make your resume feel cluttered, like your great Aunt Susan's curio cabinet.
Look at my treasures.
So here are a few guidelines on using different types of fonts on the same resume. I recommend going for no more than 2 fonts used simultaneously on your resume. One font would be for your headers and subheaders, and the other would be for the content of your resume. I'd also like to discourage you from strategically bolding or italicizing certain results or accomplishments in order to make them pop. People who review resumes for a living, so recruiters and talent acquisition professionals, are very proficient in getting the information that they need from your resume. They don't need extra bolding, and in fact, that extra bolding I have heard can disrupt the flow of their reading. Where I do use bold is to maintain the structure of the resume. So I bold things that include position and role titles, date ranges, degrees, certifications, and other credentials, volunteer role titles, and categories of accomplishments. To know what I'm talking about when I mention categories of accomplishments, make sure to check out my recent video where I talk about this topic. So now let me show you my favorite fonts that I use regularly across my resumes. First, let me show you my all-time favorite fonts, where I'm using Microsoft Sans Serif for the headers and subheaders, and Calibri Light for the body of the resume. But you don't have to do what I did, where I'm using a different font for headers and subheaders and a different font for the body of the resume. It's quite fine to use one font style for your entire resume. If you recall the Calibri version resume that we looked at earlier, this is using 100% Calibri. Other fonts I like include Arial, which is tried and true. I've used Segoe or Segoe a few times. I've recently used Franklin Gothic Book, Candera, and Corbel, and Tahoma works too. As you saw us going through these resumes using different font styles, you would have seen that they did vary quite a bit in their own width and spacing. All of the font sizes in these resumes have remained the same. The content is at 11 points. But as you could see, different fonts had different effects. So as you're creating your resume, you're going to want to be very mindful of that as well. So as you can see, there are a variety of fonts that you can choose from for your resume, and that different fonts can give a different look and feel to the document. But just remember that look and feel is secondary to the most important consideration, which is readability of your resume by humans. And here's my cue for you. After watching this video, what are your feelings about fonts? Will you be changing yours, or are you happy with what you've got? Tell me in the comments below. As you know, I make a lot of videos, but I also make free guides to help you in your job search. If you'd like to grab my free cover letter guide and checklist, make sure you sign up for it. The link is in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, make sure to give it a like, share it with a friend, and click on my face over there and subscribe. And I'll see you next time.